This is one of those classic One Piece chapters that really highlights Oda is a master storyteller. The man never misses. The range of emotions he made me feel, the goosebumps, the tears, the excitement, the blend of the lore with the action and the hype, and I just have to start by saying, wow. I love this chapter. I mean, I absolutely love it. We're truly in the thick of the God Valley incident, and this has been a 10,000 over 10 flashback. But it's about to get even better because we have finally arrived at the main event. The one that we have been waiting years to see. Roger, Garp, and Zebek standing face to face at God Valley. An event that was simplified into a single line. Roger and Garp teamed up to defeat Rocks. But now we are seeing the layers behind that simplified summary. The strategy, the tragedy, and the uncomfortable truth behind this so-called team-up. Because contrary to how he was first introduced, Rocks is not an evil guy that had to be taken out. He was the GOAT to the very end. And we are reminded of this from very early on in chapter 1164. Despite having been turned at the end of chapter 1163, our main man is still holding on. Rather than falling subject to Imu's ability straight away, we see him remain actually in control of his consciousness for a significant time, still taunting Imu, insulting Imu, calling out Imu's weaknesses and condemning their eventual failure at the hands of the inheritors of the will of Davy Jones and Joy Boy. Now sadly, it does seem that Rocks unfortunately will not be the man himself to take Imu down who's going to carry on Davy Jones's will to the end. But before we get into all of the lore and the implications for the future, something I want to discuss is all of the character relationships that we might have just taken for granted, but I think was quite subtly but very beautifully highlighted in this chapter. All of the deep-rooted friendships, or at least the respect between these figures with such complicated, complex ties. First up, there's Rocks and Whitebeard. I have to say, Oda has been very intentional with how he's portrayed their clash. From a power scaling point of view, it's clear that Oda doesn't want to portray Whitebeard as being significantly weaker than Rocks, or even the idea that Rocks was easily able to defeat him. All we see is a brief but even clash. And even though it is suggested that Rocks was able to come out on top, we don't actually see what happened to Whitebeard. And can we also note that Whitebeard only uses his elbow to defend against Rocks? It feels very deliberate that he doesn't swing his sword, doesn't unleash his devastating devil fruit powers. All of which suggests that if Whitebeard were to truly go all out, then this could have been a very different matchup. But on a much more deeper, on a much more emotional level, I get the feeling that Whitebeard is being very intentional in how he clashes with Rocks, and it's as if he doesn't actually want to fight or hurt this man. The accompanying dialogue as well, it's enough to break your heart. Whitebeard asking, "Are we in your way?" There's so much meaning to this, especially given the nature of the Rocks' pirates, a squabbling crew that constantly betrayed each other. And yet even still, there was this sense of real camaraderie that existed, especially between Whitebeard and Rocks. It always felt to me as if Whitebeard actually did have faith in Rocks, actually wanted to help Rocks achieve his goal. After all, Whitebeard is a stand-up guy who chose not to leave his friend and captain. He chose to stand by Rocks' side even when it became clear that they were facing up against a literal monster, the likes of which they had never seen before. And now he's being told that he's in the way instead. To see that bond shattered here, it adds another layer of tragedy that makes this scene hit even harder. Just oof. And then even the moments between Kaido and Rocks, or Linlin and Rocks. I don't know if I'm overthinking it, but despite Linlin getting angry at Kaido for intercepting the devil fruit from her, I still get this sense that Linlin feels still very protective over Kaido. She's upset that Rocks hurt her little brother. And you can actually read into these scenes so that it adds more into the story. Kaido getting attacked by Rocks might be the origin for Kaido's trauma around betrayal. That moment where he learned that even those he admires the most could turn on him. And I love that Big Mom charged in right after seeing Kaido get tossed because her reaction feels emotional, not strategic. If she truly saw Rocks' rampage as a betrayal and never fully understood that it was caused by Domi Reversi, that could even explain why her own crew later on became entirely family-based. She built a world where betrayal was impossible, or as she thought, because everyone was bound by blood. But the most interesting is, of course, the relationship between Rocks, Roger, and Garp. The way that we see Roger and Garp fall into line side by side without a word. The two of them screaming in unison, bring it on, no prior agreement or conversation, like they just immediately instinctively knew that the two of them would fight side by side. Such a switch up from the constant squabbling that we have seen throughout the flashback. As soon as things get serious, they needed no words. They just fall into line united, as if it's the most obvious thing to do. And you guys may know that I have quite recently discussed my thoughts, my theory that Roger and Garp might have actually been best friends, might have known each other for a long time since they were kids, and I do highly recommend you watch that video if you haven't already. And the more I see of their interactions, their relationship, the more convinced I feel. Look at these panels, the way that Oda is drawing them in perfect parallel. And then add rocks to the equation and the respect, the shared respect that exists between these legends. Garp, as a Navy man, a vice admiral, when he sees what Rocks has become, it's like he's saying, I know you're a pirate, I know you're my enemy, but you are not this. This beast, this creature, this monster is not who you are. This isn't right. Whereas Roger's reaction, that really made me think of how Luffy would have similarly reacted in that situation. Like Garp, Roger is probably more curious than afraid, wondering what he's even looking at right now, but at the same time, he has that Roger-type instinct. I won't let you hurt my crew. And Roger's line here hits even harder when you remember that Garp once said Roger turns into a monster when his crew is in danger. So it's only fitting that we're about to see an absolutely beastly Roger facing off against arguably the biggest monster the series has ever thrown at us, Rocks Zebek. And the fact that Roger has mostly taken a backseat throughout the flashback now seems very intentional. Like Oda has been saving him for this exact moment. You can tell that Roger is about to play the biggest role here, not just alongside Garp in taking down Rocks, but even potentially as the reason that Imu might get taken out of the equation. Up until this point, we still haven't seen the full extent of Roger's powers. Sure, we've witnessed his clashes with Whitebeard and how easily he outclassed someone even like Odin, but Roger as the underdog is something completely new. This is the first time we're gonna see Roger up against an opponent who genuinely poses a real danger, and because of that, he's going to have to go all out from the very start. And then as we get super excited to witness all of this, to witness this insane battle begin, Rocks delivers a killer line. Please kill me. That floored me. This is what I mean about the range of emotions that Oda had us feeling. He has steadily built up to this highly anticipated moment of Roger and Garp facing up against Rocks. Something we knew was going to happen, something we've been excitedly anticipating for years. We've always known we were going to see this, but the build up to this moment, even within the chapter, was phenomenal. You know, it starts off with Rocks easily getting through the others, right? Kaido, Linlin, easy work. Kaido gets caught off guard and is sent flying. Big Mom tries to attack, she's also sent flying. He doesn't exactly make quick work of Whitebeard. Like I said, Oda is smart and he leaves it ambiguous as to what happened, and we do see that Whitebeard was able to hold his own against the demonized Rocks, only with an elbow. But still, clearly Whitebeard has been taken out of the picture, even though we wouldn't call it a complete loss, because the panel after Rocks and Whitebeard clashing shows half of God Valley collapsing, which says enough about the level of destruction when people of this caliber fight. But still, how crazy is that? Rocks just took on 3 future Emperors of the Seas in quick succession, 3 figures who would each be named the strongest man, the strongest woman, the strongest creature. It's a visual representation that no single man, no single person could defeat him at this point, which is exactly why Roger and Garp had to team up in the first place. And like I said, I love how Oda set up the battlefield. We see Garp and Roger send their respective men away, both of them taking in a deep breath before roaring out a challenge at Rocks, and then cut to them standing side by side, face to face with now a giant-sized Rocks. And yes, I totally started animating all of this in my head because the flow of it all was just perfect. But then soon after the hype, what do we see instead? A demon reversed Rocks, still holding on to his humanity the best that he can, holding on to his own will, still just holding, just fighting and pleading, please kill me. The tears. And this moment also shows the respect that Rocks has for Roger and Garp. He knows that these two are the only ones that can take him down, and he knows that despite all of the differences between the three, all the times that they would have faced off, all the times that they would have fought in the past, and despite the fact that for all intents and purposes, they are each each other's enemies. But even despite all of this, he can be assured in their honor. He knows that they're not going to let him turn into this monster. They're not going to let him turn into a mindless beast that does the bidding of another creature. There's too much respect between these men. This sort of belief can only exist between men who do have such deep-rooted respect for each other. A type of acknowledgement between equal legends who have fought, who have interacted on the same level, a respect that transcends factions. Like I said, absolute cinema. And then there's also Rox and Harold, the latter of whom still hasn't been seen at God Valley, and yet even still, Oda manages to tease out a beautiful relationship, a beautiful friendship with Rox, because the last interaction we saw between these two ended on quite a sad note. The two were fighting because Harold seemed to be prioritizing getting world government recognition over helping out his friend, and I will however say, and I have said before, that I personally still think that there is much more to than what we just saw. Harold and Rox clashing might have been just purely for show because world government was watching from afar, and so Harold had to keep up appearances, but still, it's undisputable that the last thing that we witnessed was a disagreement, a fight, a sense of betrayal and disappointment, and yet Rox still remains so loyal to Harold even now. As soon as Imu mentions Elbaf, Rox gets defensive. In fact, I would even say it's the first time that we see Rox seem a little panicked or scared. Up until this point, Rox has been the one to taunt Imu, reminding them of Joy Boy, of Davy Jones, and the way that he gets angry at Imu for threatening his friend, you really get the sense that there is a sense of understanding within Rox of where Harold is coming from, when he says that Harold just wants peace. Because when we've seen interactions between the two in previous chapters, Rox has been constantly trying to persuade Harold to join his side, give up on his plans for a relationship with the world government, and yet from this dialogue, you can actually see that Rox deep down understands and perhaps even respects Harold's decisions. And I'm still hoping that Harold will return the favor and show up at God Valley, but the scene also raises some interesting potential clues as to how Domi Reversi may work. Because it seemed that Rox was actively and successfully fighting against being affected by Domi Reversi at the beginning of the chapter, you know, he wasn't immediately taken over and was able to exchange dialogue with Imu for quite some time, but then, like I said, it's the mention of Harold and Elbaf that seems to really get at Rox, and that's when it seems like Domi Reversi finally seems to break through. So it's possible that that statement from Imu could have even been what triggered the ability to finally take hold. And if you watch my last video, we dive deep into the mechanics of how Domi Reversi may work, all of its limitations, its natures, its possible conditions, and after this chapter, it could be another clue to support the idea that Domi Reversi also relies on some sort of emotional vulnerability. The threat to Harold and Elbaf might have been what got to Rox in the end, suggesting that Domi Reversi might work by targeting a person's mental or emotional state and is effective when they're most vulnerable, which then could also support the idea that's why figures like Joy Boy and the inheritors of the Nika Devil Fruit might be immune to Domi Reversi because they're, you know, warriors of laughter. They're the Joy Boy. They don't feel that sort of emotional vulnerability. But speaking of Joy Boy, let's pivot and talk about all the lore in this chapter. But before we move on, if you've enjoyed the discussion so far, please subscribe to the channel. This way you won't miss out on any other future One Piece discussions, and also you can help out a fellow One Piece fan get to 100,000 subscribers. We're so close and I hugely appreciate it. So based on Rox's dialogue in this chapter, it finally seems like it has been confirmed that Joy Boy and Davy Jones are in fact two distinct figures. The way that earlier on with Rox's dialogue, Oda had me feeling certain, so convinced that Davy Jones is indeed Joy Boy, to then quickly confirm only within the span of a few panels that actually Joy Boy and Davy Jones are completely two separate people, I have to laugh. And actually, there's so much to unpack in this conversation between Rox and Imu. Davy Jones, according to Rox, is the previous king, while Imu is very adamant that Davy Jones was never a king. And this disagreement between the two and how they view things, I'm assuming that Davy Jones was actually the king, but for those on the world government faction, they just never recognized him for it. And this also actually does a lot to recontextualize Rox for me as well. Like, Rox's dream to become king of the world wasn't based on any sort of personal ambition for power, but it might have actually been more motivated by a sense of justice, an attempt to reclaim the throne of his ancestors. And it all just makes the Void Century War in that period so much more fascinating because it's even bigger than we thought. It's not just Joy Boy as one figure against the 20 Kingdoms, there's also Davy Jones. They're two separate people. It's this messy, complex web of relationships, a complex web of fate that binds the three together, as Imu says it. And then there's also this idea of Davey's dream. I actually didn't catch the full significance of Imu's line upon my first read of the chapter, but now I can't help but feel like this is a very deliberate word choice. Imu orders Rox to put an end to Davey's dream. Davey's dream. Does dream here mean what I think it means? Could it be that Davy Jones's dream is the same dream as Luffy's dream, as the Pirate King Roger's dream? And then there's also the Davy Jones promise, which you may remember is exactly what I said after chapter 1163, because towards the end of that chapter, Rox mentioned that a promise is a promise after all, and back then I said that although the most straightforward interpretation could be that he's referring to his own promise, more of a threat or a warning really, that he would be back to face off against Imu after Rox first met Imu at Marijois. But I was thinking in chapter 1163, although that could be the most straightforward interpretation, Rox may actually be referring to a different promise, a centuries old promise that Davy Jones made, and it seems like that really could be the case with Rox mentioning Davy Jones's promise again, and the idea that someone is going to inherit Davy's will and fulfill that promise. And while Rox was clearly the inheritor of Davy Jones's will, it's also clearly shaping up that he won't be the one to carry that until the end. He's not going to be the one to fulfill that promise, because even Edis makes a super interesting comment in this chapter. She says that Rox wasn't ready yet. He could have been ready. He could have been the one to fulfill Davy Jones's promise, but he wasn't ready yet. And even that wording feels very deliberate when you consider that we've heard similar things before, especially in regards to Roger, who was also too early. I'm sure I'm not alone in immediately thinking that this could be referring to Rox's plan about needing 2 specific devil fruits, and the fact that he wasn't ready yet might be a reference to how he hadn't acquired those 2 devil fruits, which would be quite different to how Roger was too early, because in that case it seemed more like they were referring to Shirahoshi not being born yet. But then when you put it all together, it does seem to make a lot more sense, because it explains all the headshots that we see Imu have in the flower room. Blackbeard as the descendant of Davy Jones, Luffy and his connection to Joy Boy, Vivi and Lily, and Shirahoshi and the previous Poseidon. All of this just seems to be coming together. And then there's also the voice of all things that we see in this chapter. We've already known that Roger possessed it, that was made clear in Odin's flashback, but now it seems that Garp must have that ability as well, which honestly isn't that surprising. Garp is one of the most prominent D carriers that we know in the series, so Garp having it fits perfectly, although Roger is clearly shown reacting to the voice, hands over his ears, visibly hearing Rox's voice, whereas Garp, it's not as clear, but at the very least, he seems to be instinctively aware of what's happening. And so, if Garp also has the voice of all things, I would put money on Dragon having it as well. And then finally, as goated as Rox is, as goated as all of these legends are, it's crazy that in a chapter, in a flashback that involves so many heavy hitters, the absolute creme de la creme of legendary figures, the MVP has to be Kuma. The greatness of Kuma continues yet again in this chapter. Battered and bruised, arrows sticking out of him, and yet this kid is still moving, scanning the battlefield, saving whoever he can, and that selflessness is what allowed Edis and Teach to escape. Kuma saves them from getting killed by their own father or their own husband. He protected them from getting blasted by the cannonballs. He jumps and places himself between them and Rox, risking everything to make sure that they survived. Can this character get any better? I mean, seriously? I've said it before, I always welcome Kuma on whatever page he's on, and this chapter reminds you of exactly why. Every single appearance of him just tugs at your heartstrings. The amount of people he's saved and the future that he's preserved just keeps on increasing. And as the one that has saved both Luffy and Blackbeard, and as I've said before, Luffy and Blackbeard are going to need to team up to defeat Imu, you could even argue that Kuma is the one that allowed all of it to happen. And now this also raises other interesting questions, like where did Blackbeard and Edis go? Where did they get sent to? Is it possible even that Edis is still alive? It was pointed out during the live stream that if you go back to chapter 965, the buildings in the background behind Teach as he begs to join the Whitebeard pirates actually resembles the buildings of Sorbet Kingdom, in particular the dome-shaped roofs, and I have to agree. So it could be possible that Teach's story becomes even juicier if we find out that he actually grew up on the same island as Kuma and Ginny. You know, he was in the background experiencing all the terrors that King Bekori was unleashing on its civilians, just facing tragedy after tragedy. Because even though he was saved in this chapter, we still have to remember that the last memory that he would have of his father was of Rox trying to kill him and his mother. Even if he knows that that wasn't truly Rox that was doing that, I'm sure that's gonna leave some massive scar. But those are just some of my initial thoughts after reading chapter 1164. Let me know yours by leaving a comment below. If you enjoyed our discussion, please like the video, share the video, and please do subscribe so that you don't miss out on future discussions. You can also help support the channel further by becoming a Patreon or channel member like these wonderful people. But as always, thank you for listening to another one of my crazy One Piece ramblings. This is JoyGirl, and I'll see you again soon.